Redfield and Wilton Strategies to do a poll in July, and it found that 70% of Americans believe that children in schools should be taught to feel proud of their country. At the same time, 57% think institutional racism still exists in the United States. So, Kim, if most Americans believe national pride is something we should teach, cool, maybe we should teach that. But also, if 57% of the nation believes that institutional racism is real, shouldn't we teach about that as well?
Well, I think it's up to a teacher's discretion, honestly, in the classroom. And this is one of the side effects, I think, of the COVID pandemic, right? You had a lot of people that were able to see exactly what the curriculum was in each school because so many kids were learning virtually at home. And so I think it was a good thing, right? Now, I do believe that teachers probably should teach the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that's what they're trying to do in Florida. I have to say, I'm on Governor Ron DeSantis' side here. I know people are probably not shocked to hear that. But I do believe that we should be teaching some of the good parts that came out of slavery. And I say that is because there are some people that were born into slavery and they were able to take those skills that they learned and went on to be entrepreneurs. There are some of the inventions that we have today, like the folding chair with the bookcase in the back, that was invented by a man named Alexander, who was living in Lynchburg, Virginia. He was born into slavery, but he knew that there was a need there because of the church that he attended. Had they not been slaves, no, they would not have learned those skills. But of course, I am not saying that slavery was a job program. That's not what I'm saying.
I get that, but here's my concern with that. If I tell the story of American slavery in the abstract, in a vacuum, sure, right? We could talk about all the nuances of it. But this is a country that has historically whitewashed slavery. This is a country that consistently pretends that bad things did not happen. You add to that the fact that there's been a movement around the country for decades to change textbooks, to not even often talk about slavery as slavery, but to talk about it as immigration, to talk about it as a jobs program and other things that you're not doing, but many other people have done. So against that backdrop, if we then encourage teachers or encourage curriculum designers to focus on the good that came out of slavery, it becomes another way to sort of whitewash or to understate just how severe an impact slavery had. We are still to this day harmed by slavery. We still to this day pay an economic and social and cultural debt to what happened to us in slavery. So if all that stuff is true, then a textbook spending time focusing on the fact that some people got some skills out of it, to me, it's time we could spend talking about the need for reparations. It's time we could spend talking about the lingering impact of slavery. It's time we could spend talking about the people who entered slavery with skills and who were actually selected for their skill sets on the continent of Africa. We can talk about all that stuff in a finite amount of time rather than talking about a few people who were blacksmiths who were able to get jobs when, in fact, there's so many laws and programs stop people from getting access to jobs, to freedom, to justice, to food, clothing, shelter, equality, all that stuff, even after so-called emancipation.
Yeah, well, Mark, look, I still believe you teach the good, the bad, and the ugly. You teach all of it. And so I do have to ask you, without slavery in this country, which, again, you had blacks purchasing blacks, you had blacks selling blacks, you had Native Americans purchasing blacks, you had blacks purchasing Native Americans. It goes on and on and on. And I think that conversation around reparations does get very complicated. And I know that there are a lot of people that advocate for that. But beyond that, I have to ask you,
what's complicated about it?
Where would we be today without slavery?
That's a great question. That's what we call one of those counterfactual hypotheticals, right? It's hard for me to tell you where I'd be without slavery because our entire history was interrupted by it. But black people, or African people, more importantly, had empires. We had civilizations. We had governments. We had order. We had laws. Were we perfect? No society, no civilization is perfect. But the question, where would we be without slavery, would imply or suggest to people that somehow we have benefited from the enterprise of slavery, or that somehow in the aftermath of slavery we're better off than we otherwise would have been. And there's absolutely no evidence to believe that African people were better after interacting with enslavers, after interacting with the European colonists. There's no evidence of that. So I don't know where we'd be without slavery, but I'm certainly sure it's better than where we would otherwise be.
Yeah, see, and I would counter that personally with what we see on the continent of Africa today. I mean, honestly, you talked about some people having,
Where?
you know, some of the kingdoms and being on the hierarchy in Africa and different countries in Africa, and sure, but those weren't the people that were being sold into slavery. See, so it's like it's so hard to understand.
But Kim, where in Africa? I want you to be a little more specific. Where in Africa can we point to and see any kind of problem, any kind of disruption that hasn't been touched or interrupted by Europe?
You're kidding, right? Okay, so my family is from both.
Name a country that hasn't been. You're saying Nigeria and Cameroon haven't been affected by Europe? That's your argument?
There's many countries in Africa that did not have Europeans colonize it, and they're still down today. Look at the Congo, for one thing. We don't talk enough about the Congo and what they're dealing with, especially when it comes to China and everybody that is going into their country to extract cobalt and lithium and all these things that we want here in America to make us feel good with electric vehicles. So if we want to go down that road, we can go down that road, okay? But at the same time, not every country was invaded by Europeans that then put colonization on their culture and their people. That what did not happen everywhere. But I can tell you right now in Cameroon, you have a situation where you have people running. Go ahead.
Continue. Finish your thought.
Right now. We have tribes in Cameroon right now that are trying to run from the military, run from the government, and it is black on black in Cameroon. This is what's happening across Africa. I'm not saying you being a slave from a family of slavery is great. I'm not saying it for myself either. But you can't sit here and say that your life would have been better without slavery, because we just don't know. We can look back onto the continent of Africa today, and we can say that there are a lot of places where people are leaving, seeking refuge to come here in America, because this is the land of opportunity.
So just real quick, I have to take a break. You're familiar with Zaire, right? The country?
Yes. Yes.
Right. Do you know what that's called now?
What is it called now?
Yeah, Congo. So the country you're saying wasn't affected by Europe, or it was affected by Europe because it was colonized. And it's only now being called Congo again. You also, right, my point is Congo was colonized. When you talk about Cameroon, there's a reason why they speak French. It's not because they really love the language, it's because they were colonized.
There are many countries that were not colonized.
Anyway, I got to take a break. We'll be back. I want to give you a chance to finish your thought from the previous segment.
No, I appreciate it. So the Republic of Congo, I mean, there's a lot of issues there. Zaire is one of the countries that was moved into that republic. And unfortunately, you have African leaders in that area that has forced the people within that community into slave labor today. Even children are forced into slave labor. And like I said, those are the ones that are extracting the cobalt and the lithium that we find in electric vehicles or laptops or cell phones. And so there are black leaders that have enslaved black children and others. And so you still can't say whether or not our lives would have been better had we not been brought to America. I mean, you just can't say that. Now, could have been, sure, but we don't know.
She out of the DMV, you know. But like I said, man, this is, and it's funny that we were talking about the shallow nature of people, and you know, people just, you know, how stupid you gotta think black people are, and how stupid black people have been. If we want to be honest about it, because people keep trying to look past silly shit like this to elect a person just based on likability and so forth. All she has to do is have people rallying around her to get her elected to office, because she in herself doesn't even have the ability to watch. Listen, with all this out right now, you don't even have to watch. We don't have to read books no more. You can listen to a book. You know, you speak to be in a public platform and actually talk on an issue or topic. And it seemed like it was a campaign point for her. That's what it kind of sounded like it was a talking point for her, a campaign of hers. And if it's like, well, we're just going to take the good and with the bad, that's some real shallow shit to say.
What's the good? What's the good, close eyes? What's the good? What's the good about slavery? That's what I want to know. She kept talking about we're gonna tell the good, the bad, and you telling me the good about slavery is somebody inventing a folding chair.
Well, Joe, I think you just got to look closely at what she was saying.
I'm just saying her favorite money is close quarters.
there's a lot of, and that was not a that. I realized what I said. That wasn't a shot at the lady because I'm trying to be above water.
I'm not. I'm swimming.
But if you look closely at what she was saying, I think she was getting that. Why y'all stop laughing, man? Y'all make it's not even like that. It's making it. I think what she was trying to say was, we as a people would not exist if not for slavery. And so if we as a people did not exist, then all of the things that we have done, all the contributions we've made to the world.
We know that. We didn't want to be here. We didn't ask to be here.
Well, I'm just saying, I think that's that. I think I'm just saying.
If that's your point, lady, if that's your point, you could throw that shit in the garbage. We didn't. You act like we asked to be here, like we were standing in Africa, like, oh my goodness, I wish I could go to this undiscovered land called America and help to discover that land.
They weren't talking like that prior to colonization.
I'm just saying. But that's like the crazy. That's one of the craziest things I've ever heard. Like we know we wouldn't exist. We wasn't trying to be African Americans. We wasn't trying to be here. We were chilling.
Well, Joe, you taking this too seriously, because like even if what I'm saying was her actual point, which it clearly was not, because she then turned around and talked about how the conditions of Africa right now, as if those conditions don't exist. So, also, because which is the point PC was making.
But it still all goes back. Like, okay, we didn't ask to be here, right? We didn't ask to be here, but guess what? Africa is messed up today, and it's got plenty of documentation. You know what?
I would tell her, if I could talk to her, this is what I would say. If you want to ask imaginary questions, I'll give you an imaginary answer. If slavery hadn't have happened, the entire world would be Wakanda.
Sounds like a plan.
And we would all be traveling the galaxy, because you got to remember now, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima said that in ancient Egypt, almost 2,000 years ago, they were only a couple hundred years away from computers. Imagine the first computer popping up on the scene 2,000 years ago. Where would we be right now?
The technological advances that they were able to make before Europeans showed up is evidenced. Iron smelting. Like, come on, stop.
Well, we need, like, I'm just, because I love the computer thing, because it's like, okay, computers have only been around for about 50 years now, right? 50, 60 years, right? Mm-hmm. Look at the technological advances that have come in the last 50, 60. Like, if somebody that was like in their 60s or 70s, in the 40s, were to be like brought back to life right now, they would not recognize the world. Yeah. Like, so imagine all of these changes happening as rapidly as they have been happening for the last 2,000 years.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find this chick. I'm trying. Hold on.
She also tried to throw in, the old red herring that they always throw in, where black people sold other Africans into slavery. I mean, we all know indentured servitude and war and stuff existed in the world before the slave trade. We know.
Well, I got an interesting point about that, because it's real interesting how this shapes out. Now, follow me, y'all.
I found her. She's a Republican.
What's her name?
I knew she was a Republican.
What's her name?
Kim Clackick.
Yeah, she's making Republican talking points. Mm-hmm. And she's in an interview opposing Mark Lamont Hill. Mark Lamont Hill would never do that to a Democrat. But
right.
Follow me. This is what I find interesting about that particular argument about black people sold black people into slavery, so black people are just as guilty as white people. It only works in that scenario. When we start talking about some of the interesting little hidden tidbits of slavery, one of them is that we knew white women owned slaves. What we didn't know, what most people still don't know, is that when a white woman married a white man, oftentimes the white woman would sue her husband to retain ownership of her property, aka her slaves. And a lot of times she won.
Yeah, that was the case with George Washington and Martha Washington. She had to.
So it becomes interesting, right? Because white women seem to get a pass for their role in every fucking thing. So if we gonna play this game, we gonna say, well, black people own black people, so slavery couldn't have been all bad. Then now we got to eliminate the whole game of feminism because white women sued their husbands to retain ownership of their black men and won those cases while still being married to white men. So if a white woman could sue a white man for property ownership of a black man and win the case while still being married to the white man, then what the fuck are we talking about?
Hey.
Hold on, y'all.
I'm just saying. But also, you know, the bullshit that they try to use is, like I was saying, we know indentured servitude existed before the transatlantic slave trade. But what the bullshit they try to use is, well, these people, slavery already existed. These people were already doing this, and they try to make it seem like chattel slavery was what the world was practicing. And they also try to make it seem like the Africans, like the bulk of the Africans understood that they were selling other Africans or even some Africans maybe from their tribe into the transatlantic slave trade. You have some African people who knew they was working with them. They had a better idea. But for the most part, we're also talking about you got an army coming up against you and your people. And they threatening you in your safety and your livelihood for you and your people. And they say it's either you or your neighbors. What y'all doing? I'm just saying. So let's not act like if we was there, we would have done something different, right? But let's put some real context and some real understanding to what actually was happening to African people. Were there some people who were complicit? Yeah, but that wasn't a large amount. We're not gonna act like that was a large amount of African people. The bulk of African people were not down with that. So let's stop that. But that's the tricks that they play, along with the movie version of Dr. King. The tricks they play.
Well, you know, when you control the story, you control the narrative, and that's the whole game of history. Whoever wins gets to tell the story. And they get to tell the story. They get to tell the story the way they want to, and continuously use revisionist history to recreate the narrative as it best fits them. This is why, you know, we talk about where this could possibly lead. And like I said, Mark has spoke on something that was prevalent: the fact that now there are history books that don't even use the word slavery in them. And we look back at there were I'm trying to think of the name of them. Satirical articles, satirical articles, like maybe a few years before they actually introduced this into legislation, into which they were going to, or just introduce this in terms of policy, because it wasn't legislation, in terms of removing the notion of the word slavery and slave and slavery out of these textbooks. Let's not forget who writes the textbooks. It's still, they're still connected, if I'm not mistaken, to the United Daughters of the Confederacy in some way, shape, or form. They still own some of those companies that actually produce it, if I'm not mistaken. Now, I could be wrong, and I'll find out in the comments. But
I don't think you're mistaken.
So the narrative is going to often, in this case, especially when you have an abuser. I mean, just think of it like this. Suppose the Nazis and the Axis nations actually won World War II. We would probably be talking in German right now. We probably be Zing. I mean, I don't know how to talk in German.
Wow.
But
shit.
Wow. We'd be the. I mean, it all depends on who wins. And I mean, Napoleon would always say, I care not what people speak on things, because I'm going to write history myself. And I mean, he's not the only person that said it. You go back to every significant leader, notarized leader of the past, 100 years, several hundred years, several centuries in, they've all said the same thing. Their plan is to win, which is what bothers me with black people, because when we start talking about winning, then Negroes on this moral ground. Well, I'm gonna do it the right way. Man, fuck out of here. The war is to win.
Hey man, but look,
you win the war, then you write in the book the right way. We didn't push them all over this ditch and do A, B, and C to them. They fell. You change the story when you win. Know what I mean? But hey man.
What you African Americans need to understand. What's the lady name again?
What is it? Hold on. Like Kim Klick. It's spelled real crazy. Like KLICK, some shit like that.
Okay. Kim KK. So yeah. She's teaching us, right? Because we have to understand the nature of the African person through the lens of a colonizer, right? So if you look at the nature of African people through the lens of a colonizer, you will understand that the African needed to be saved by the European. The African was living at such a desolate level. Like they never really had thoughts. They didn't think in Africa. They didn't have thoughts. And the first time African actually had a thought was when the boat came up. Cause that was the first time they saw something in the water, right? So that was so they had to formulate some kind of thought, and that was the first time. So this is what she's teaching us. She wants us to understand that the European saved the savage African from themselves in the jungles, because even though African people was living like a long time, and they had like cultures, languages, science, like all types of stuff. Like black people were doing remarkable things on the continent, but see, that's not real black history, right? See, y'all need to start getting y'all history from the TV. See, books, come on, man. Books, come on, man. That's the black man's trick to get you to think that the white man didn't come to save you when you're trying to read books. See, y'all need to watch out for these tricky black people who try to tell y'all, hey man, y'all need to read books, and y'all need to study, and y'all need to know what's going on. See, those black people are trying to keep you from the white man's warmth. See,
you know what's funny about that is that I actually saw a documentary where they said that when white people, and this is why you really got to be careful about that. But anyways, they said that when white people first showed up, when the Europeans first showed up on the continent of America and in Africa and in everywhere else they went to, because they were the first ones with boats, the inhabitants of the land didn't even see them because they had never seen boats before and had no idea of what boats were. So they didn't even see the boats until somebody explained to them the concept of a boat. And then they looked out into the ocean and saw boats. I said, are you fucking shitting me?